One of the recent trends in motorcycling is the development of ergonomically forgiving sport bikes. Perhaps this is a consequence of the even more prominent motorcycling trend, evident for decades now, of the steady advance of the average rider age. And not all those boomers and 40-50-somethings are buying cruisers. A lot of them are hardcore sport bike riders, who still want performance, but without the track-biased riding position. At least, those were the dots I connected during Suzuki's press presentation describing the demographic target of its new 2016 model GSX-S1000F models. Personally, my 38-year-old mind doesn't need any convincing, as the merits of these models appeal to common sense. While the race-inspired supersport and superbike platforms are thrilling, without question, they are almost comically overperforming for real-world conditions. Would I like 180 horsepower? Sure. Would I be happier with a mere 140 horsepower but be able to enjoy that performance without my wrists, legs and back crying out in agony after a handful of miles? Yes, that sounds better. Some young, limber folks are scoffing at such fogyish thinking. To which I say, with all sincerity, enjoy your youthful vigor and happily burn the performance candle at both ends with the myriad of track-inspired offerings available, of which you can read in Motouse's 2015 Superbike Shootouts. But I'm confident some other readers are more in accord with my reasoning, and for whom these GSX-S designs are tailor-made. The formula for bikes like the GSX-S1000 models follow a familiar pattern. Borrow an existing sport bike engine, in this case the 2005 version of the GSX-R1000, tune it for a more street-friendly power band, and then mate it to a sporty chassis with the key alteration being a more upright, standard riding position and relaxed ergonomics. And, since no one is tracking lap times with a stopwatch or giving you messages on a pitboard during your typical weekend play ride, all the cutting-edge electronics and top-shelf, competition-grade braking and suspension components aren't a necessity. This approach has often produced naked versions of a marquee's litterbike platform, including designs like the Yamaha FZ1, Honda CBR-1000R and Kawasaki Z1000. Kawasaki took things in a more traditional sport bike direction with its fully fared Ninja 1000, a versatile, street-friendly offering that serves multiple roles, not the least of which is being one of Motouse's favorite sport touring mounts. Suzuki's 2016 GSX-S1000 and GSX-S1000F are most analogous to the Z1000 and Ninja 1000. And while Suzuki might be late to the party, I'm glad they finally made it, because these GSX-S1000 models do impress. GSX-S1000, our first ride experience aboard both the GSX-S1000 models took place in Monterey, California, riding north into the mountainous roads that wind their way from Santa Cruz to San Francisco. The morning stretch was aboard the naked GSX-S1000. And while some readers might find the Suzuki's lines uninspired, I personally favor them over some of its more aggressively styled competitors. Suzuki had a Yoshimura-prepped GSX-S1000 model along for the ride too, which looked particularly fetching. I also found the build quality for the new GSX-S exceeded expectation for bikes with a relatively low MSRP, $9,999 minus $10,999. In this regard, the new models are the exact opposite of the old GSX-1250FA, which seemed like an overpriced, flimsy, parts bin special by comparison. Instead, these new bikes remind me of the latest generation V-Strom designs, from the controls down to the instrument console and its informative and easy-to-read LCD panel. Tossing a leg over the bike, its 31.9-inch seat height allowed an easy flat-footed reach to the ground for my 32-inch inseam. Part of this is due to the seat shape, which, like most designs nowadays, tapers inward at the tank. The bike feels slender behind the controls, without being cramped, and I immediately like the placement of its wide aluminum handlebar, a Renthalfad bar design. One nifty feature on the GSX-S1000 is its easy start ignition, which fires up the bike with a single dab of the starter button. Riders also don't need to pull in the clutch, provided bike is in neutral. Sure, holding your thumb down for an extra second for the engine to kick over on a regular bike isn't exactly a hardship, but it's a convenient gadget on the GSX-S. Of course, it's what happens after the bike fires up that really matters. The GSX-S1000 sources a version of the K5 GSX-R1000 inline 4. The 999cc displacement and 73.4mm bore and 59mm stroke are unchanged, but engineers tuned the S model engine for street performance. New pistons, cane profiles and revised valve timing, those valves being made of steel instead of the R's titanium, are the most notable revisions, with the GSX-S sacrificing top-end horsepower for improved bottom and mid-range torque. The S models claim 145 peak horsepower and 78 pounds-foot torque, but Suzuki notes that the S churns out more torque down low than its R sibling, which only nets its performance advantage at the upper end of the power band. By comparison, the GSX-R1000 claims 185 peak horsepower at 11,500 RPM, which is, coincidentally, where the S model's redline. In practical use, the engine is tuned quite well for the street. The S is content to zoom along in its responsive bottom end, with things getting more interesting in the meaty mid-range. Fueling is immediate, bordering on abrupt in the transition from fully closed throttle to open, but that's picking nits. Roll on the gas and there is more than ample power for spirited street riding, and once the GSX-S gets spinning up into its top end things get really interesting. It's a proper sport bike, and only the most hard-hearted performance junkies will regard the Suzuki as a neutered GSX-R. This contrasts one of its main rivals, the CBR1000R, which does feel detuned and polite when compared to its litter bike kin. GSX-S1000F after lunch at Alice's Restaurant, a highly recommended stop for riders on Skyline Boulevard. The remainder of the day would be aboard the GSX-S1000F. It's not an oversimplification to say the F is the same bike with off-airing. I guess that's what the F is for. The extra bodywork adds 13 pounds to the naked bike's 459-pound claim curb weight. To compensate for this weight change and the fairing's aerodynamic effect, the front fork utilizes slightly higher oil capacity. Other than that, the bikes are identical. Surprisingly, my initial handling impression on the F was that it's smoother and more settled. I credit this mostly to the immaculate road surfacing of Highway 84, an epic stretch of road which cuts through La Honda on its way down to the Pacific Coast Highway. Sifting through long sweeping the corners, the GSX-S1000F excels. But even factoring in the flawless road conditions, I'd still rate the F's front end a hair more composed than the naked bike. I suppose the biggest contributing factor here is the steadying aerodynamics of the fairing and windscreen. Another oddity that I noted aboard the F was that its front brakes didn't feel as potent. In fact, the first time I hammered them approaching a corner I had yikes moment because they didn't bite the same as my morning ride and I had to squeeze harder. I didn't have any notable complaints about the morning S1000's braking prowess, so I reckon this incident on the F is more likely an anomaly to my individual bike. Perhaps the pads hadn't bedded in. Still, Suzuki claims these monoblade Brembo calipers are the same as those used on the 2014 GSX-R models, which I find surprising in hindsight. I'd rate the overall braking performance effective, but not top shelf. The ABS, which comes standard on F model and as a $500 option on the naked version, does its thing without being distracting. The GSX-S1000F doesn't have sadly bike mounts as an option, unlike the R1200RS we recently tested, or its most logical head-to-head matchup, the Ninja 1000, which is a pity, because it would make a fine sport touring platform. This is a segment last represented in the Suzuki lineup by the aforementioned GSX-S1000F. It's been several years since I've ridden the 1250, but based off my hazy memories, this new 1000F delivers a far sportier suspension and handling.